This is a story I am sure you have heard before. Boy meets watch, boy falls in love with watch, boy needs watch in his life. That was my story this week. This is the Islander Port Jefferson Skin Diver, ISL-177. At the time of this video, you can pick this watch up at longislandwatch.com for $415. Now, full disclosure, Mark and Ryan at Long Island were nice enough to send this in to me for review, and the plan was to send it back once my video is done. But like I said, I need this watch, so I am contacting them to buy this watch with my own money. Hey everyone, as you can imagine, I see a lot of watches making these videos, and 99% of them I don't consider keeping. There's nothing wrong with them, but for me personally, I am looking to have a very small watch collection that really connect with me. And for whatever reason, this one does that. Now, it's not perfect, of course. No watch is. But I do think there's something special going on here. Between the size, the color, the quality, the originality, it is just working for me. You know, let's take a closer look and you can decide for yourself whether or not you agree with me. Hey everyone, if you like these videos, please do me a favor and consider subscribing. It would really help out the channel. Now let's get on with the review. For our case construction, we have 316L stainless steel with a diameter coming in at 40 millimeters. For a lug-to-lug distance on the side, we have a very compact and nicely wearable 48 millimeters and an 11.5 overall thickness. Now this watch does have negative end links, and as you can see, it really hugs my 7-inch wrist. I had absolutely no issues wearing it as a daily driver. There is a very nice fits and finish here. You really need to get up close to even see the brushing. Now the first thing that immediately jumped out to me is how close the end link is with the case. It just seems to be matched up perfectly, both in terms of height as well as there being no gap between the two. The case has a brushed finish throughout and a small high polished area on the beveled edge, and even the side of the bracelet has been given a brushed finish. Personally, I love that because it means there's no fingerprints to deal with. Now the case and the bracelet for that matter have a fantastic feel to it. No sharp edges or corners, of course. The second thing that jumped out at me is just how thin this watch is. I didn't realize beforehand which movement they're using inside, and we'll talk more about that later on in the video, but I wanted to take a moment here and say I am quickly becoming a fan of Island watches. This is my second watch in for review, and here's what I think is exceptional. With their watch, I feel like I know exactly what to expect. They have set the bar high for themselves. With some micro brands and even with some mainstream brands, they tend to cut corners. Maybe the case is a little too sharp on the bottom, or the clasp doesn't quite have the same level of finishing, or the bracelet doesn't match up well with the case. But with Islander, at least the two I've reviewed so far, it feels like they are hyper focused on quality control. Maybe it's partly due to the fact that Mark is not only a store owner, but also a watch fanatic as well. Turning the watch over, on the back we have the nicest screw-down case back I have ever seen. Not only is the design super cool and incorporates their logo, but the overall thickness of the case back itself. It's nice and flat, letting the watch sit tight against the wrist. Now around the case back we have text that includes Islander, 150 meters, and Sapphire. The movement inside that case is the Miyota Automatic Movement 9015, and that is a big part of the reason why this case is only 11.5 millimeters thick. That movement has 24 joules, beats at 28,800 beats an hour, and that means that the second hand is going to tick 8 times per second. There's a 42-hour power reserve, it has power shock technology, it does hack, and it does hand wind. Now for accuracy, it's rated at -10 to +30 seconds a day. In my personal experience, this particular watch I have runs about 7 seconds fast per day according to my watch app. At the 3 o'clock position, we have a signed crown with the Islander logo. It is roughly 7.5 millimeters in width and 4.5 millimeters in depth. It might seem slightly large visually, but it makes sense when you consider that this is a skin diver. Now, I found the crown easy to grip and to pull out, and there's a nice pop distinguishing the different positions. This is a screw down crown, and that means you do need to unscrew it before you can hand wind it. Pulling the crown out to the first position and rotating it sets a date. Pulling it out to the second position hacks the second hand and sets the time. Moving on to the face of the watch, we have a 120 click unidirectional bezel with a black glossy ceramic insert. There are Arabic numbers at the 15, 30, and 45-minute markers, and those are done in a mustard yellow color and are also loomed with C3 Superluminova. What I love here is the use of color and the fact that it still has a high amount of contrast. The coin edge is easy to grip and has a satisfying click to it. And there is no backplay, and everything lines up nicely. Moving on to the dial itself, we have black Arabic numbers on this Caribbean green dial, starting at 5 and going all the way up to 60. Honestly, these are small. Between that and the distortion from the sapphire, they are impossible to read. I don't think they are actually added for use, but instead for mere visual interest. Inside of that, we have an applied track done in this metallic silver color. This adds a touch of depth to the dial and helps to break up that green background. I also like the way that the light plays with that metallic color, being brighter in some parts and darker in others at times. There are small orange squares at the 5-minute markers, which align with those indices, and then there are small hatch marks in between those orange squares. Now, I'll be the first one to say the dial here looks top notch, but that is not to say that it doesn't have some issues. For instance, in my everyday testing with this watch, I found that while I can tell the time accurately at the 5-minute markers, for instance 105, 110, I cannot accurately tell the time for the minutes in between, for example 107, 108, and that's because those in-between minutes are not called out on the dial. So I'm kind of left guessing whether the time is 107 or 108. Now, take that for what you will. Obviously, if you want a super accurate watch, you're going to be using quartz, maybe even a digital. There's always a balance between form and function. Continuing on with the dial, we have applied indices done in this unique U shape with a rectangle black middle, which also happens to be loomed with a C3 Superluminova. I love the unique quality of these indices and the depth that they bring to the dial. They have an off yellow color, which pairs with the markers on the bezel. Inside of that, at the 12 o'clock position, we find the Islander name and logo printed directly on the dial. And on the other side of the center post, we see the words automatic and 150 meters done in all caps. Now, this all sits on top of the Caribbean green colored dial, which appears to have a little fleck to it. I can't help but think that it's similar to some of those restored classic cars that have a lot of fleck in the paint, so that when the light hits it, it really shines. And that is exactly what is going on here with this watch. It comes alive when the light hits it. That green color really pops and looks amazing. And quite honestly, it's just fun. Of course, that also means that in a dim environment, it doesn't pop. And the dial doesn't quite have the same contrast as the white dial version probably did. Again, it's a trade-off, form versus function. The date window at the 6 o'clock position helps to keep the dial feel balanced, and it is nice to see that it's been color matched with the dial. There's an orange border outlining it and picking up on the color of the running second hand. That running second hand is nicely sized and meets up with the metallic track surrounding the indices. I appreciate the smoothness of that second hand due to that Mayotta movement inside. Both the minute and hour hand are metallic silver and have a thin black line running down the middle and are filled with C3 Superluminova. I like the way that the shape and size of the hands relate to the indices that they meet up with. It makes the dial feel well thought out and intentional. As I mentioned before, in a dim environment, the hands could benefit from a little bit more contrast against the dial, and I do wonder if black or white hands would have accomplished this. The Luminous watch is absolutely incredible. I love the way that it looks when it all lights up. Using that C3 superluminova in the hands, indices, logo, bezel just makes it look impressive. This watch easily passed my everyday lume test. Now for anyone who doesn't know, my everyday lume test is wearing a watch, getting an average amount of light exposed to it during the day, setting alongside my bedside table, and then seeing if I can tell the time at 4 in the morning. When my eyes are fully dilated, that is when I want to know if I can read the time. And again, this watch easily passed. For a crystal, this watch comes with a single dome sapphire with AR coating inside. In my personal experience, I found that this watch performed great outside. Mark commented in one of his videos that the single dome sapphire not only provides a little distortion around the dial, but it also helps to magnify the dial. And it is this kind of detail, this forethought that they're putting into their watches that really draw me to their watches. And that brings us to the Beads of Rice bracelet. It is 20 millimeters wide at the lugs and tapers down to 18 millimeters at the clasp. It is a sign clasp with the Islander logo etched into it. It also has a photo for safety, double push button release, and 3 micro adjustments. Inside, we have a milled scissor section. Now the edges on the clasp and the bracelet are nicely finished and there are no sharp edges. For the bracelet itself, we have solid links as well as solid end links, and it's all held together with screw pins. Just like I said on the Islander Beth page that I reviewed earlier, I believe that this is one of the nicest bracelets you're going to get in this price range. So let's list out the specs for this watch. You get a sapphire crystal, the Mayota 9015 automatic movement, diameter of 40 millimeters, thickness of 11.5 millimeters, lug width of 20 millimeters, lug to lug distance 48 millimeters, and finally a water resistance of 150 meters. And finally, let's wrap up by going over the pros and cons. For pros, aesthetics. You get an original design with killer looks. You get a sapphire crystal. The lume is simply impressive, the fit and finish, and just overall attention to detail, things like the bezel aligning, where the case and the bracelet meet up, and that single dome crystal used to magnify the dial. Now for cons, the minute track. It can be difficult to read the individual minutes, and in dim environments, there could be a little bit more contrast between the dial and the hands. So my final thoughts on this watch. Now obviously I'm a fan. I started the video by telling you that I love this watch. The thing about Islander that I love, it's this original design, quality components at an affordable price. To me, that is the recipe for success. Okay, my friends, that is it. Until the next video, remember, buy whatever it is that you love. This is your watch collection after all. I'll see you next time.